Hello and welcome back. I'm Dr. Suzanne Van Hove, and we're going to be talking about the basics around the service life cycle. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at exactly what is ITIL, even though we already know, right? Do you remember it's the IT Infrastructure Library? We're going to look at some of the logistics around how ITIL came about, the service life cycle itself, and then some specifics around the life cycle phases. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. First of all, ITIL is probably the best or most well-known representative framework, methodology, or standard around the definition of service management. So how do you deliver quality services using best practices? Best practices is a key phrase here. ITIL is a collection of books. It's really describing how you manage the responsibilities of all of the stakeholders or all the parties in a value chain. So, where did this come from? So right now we've pretty much said service management, and I prefer to say service management because that is the philosophy, methodology, framework that we want to work within. ITIL is just one of many framework, standards, methodologies that address the concept of service management. The key word that I want to focus on here, though, is the one around best practice. So where do these best practices come from? So as we look at this diagram, this is a very big diagram. It's fairly dense in information, but we really just need to look at and focus on a couple of things. First of all, the top half. So we have sources and we have enablers. So sources generate, enablers aggregate the information. So best practices are going to come from international standards, industry practices, academia, training and education developments, internal experience. Those are all going to be my sources. But then my enablers of those best practices obviously are going to be my employees, the customers, the suppliers, advisors, and the various technologies. So that's the top half. So we have these practices coming in, and then we see this set of three filters. Those filters are drivers and scenarios. And this is the drivers or the scenarios that an organization is trying to address. So a service provider may address the best practices because of competition or the requirement of compliance or that they have some commitment to a customer. Those are my scenarios. Additionally, the service provider may be having these drivers of the customer itself, regulators, or even the fact that we have substitutes in how we are planning and managing services. So all of those best practices that came from the sources and the enablers go through the set of filters, and these filters are unique to every service provider. And what comes out then of those filters is the information and knowledge that's fit for the business for that organization to meet its objectives, its purpose, and they're in an appropriate context. So one last thing here. As a service management consultant, this is one of the things that I like about consulting in service management is that every organization is different. My best practices, what's stated in ITIL, the 1,961 pages of those 5 books, is the body of knowledge. How I apply it to that organization, working with the customer, working with their requirements, is that I'm going to pick out various pieces that will make sense and that will work within their environment. That's what we're talking about, and that's what this diagram is describing. Okay, kind of heavy there, but this is where best practices came from. So when we talk specifically around the logistics around ITIL, first of all and foremost, ITIL is a set of books. There's 5 of them. You can see them in the little picture off to the left. The white background with the 5 pictures of the nature shot, so to speak. That's the latest version. It's the 2011 version of ITIL. Originally, ITIL came around in the late 1980s. It was a mandate of the British government. It was actually the Prime Minister of Margaret Thatcher, one of the last things that she did, and said, hey, if you're going to do business with the British government, we got to clean this up. There was too many processes or no process whatsoever. It was like a bowl of spaghetti to do business, and it was very inefficient, ineffective. So version 1 came out in the late 80s, several books, 60 to 80 books actually, little small books, very disconnected, but all great information. In 2000, 2002, 1999 to 2002, version 2 came out, and where we compiled those books into a set of 8 additional books. Those books really took off, made it a little bit easier because there was a level of consistency in the information. And then again in 2007, we had a further development where the Lifecycle was introduced. And then we have the current version now within 2011 where we've done some edits and clarification around that service lifecycle. But bottom line, ITIL is a set of books. That's it. It describes best practices. And again, going back to the diagram that we just saw in the previous slide, you now know where those best practices have come from. It is a process-based framework. Please understand this. It is not a methodology. It is a framework. The way we utilize the information in ITIL is around the concept of adopt and adapt. We want to adopt the service life cycle, the service framework, service management principles, and we adapt them to our organization. We're able to do that with ITIL because it is non-proprietary, vendor neutral of a framework. It's not dictating that you have a specific tool. It says, here's what you have to look at. Here, make your choices that will work in your environment. The difference between a framework and a methodology says do these 5 steps and you have an outcome that we can measure. A framework says pick and choose what's going to work for your organization. The early edition of ITIL, it was the foundation for the international standard ISO IEC 20000. The international standard and ITIL are very different. I shouldn't say very different, but they have 2 different paths. An international standard is globally agreed to the minimum that needs to be in place that is documented, registered, and reviewed on a regular basis by an external party. So it's the minimum that needs to be in place to say, hey, you've achieved that service management system. Again, ITIL is a body of knowledge. So it's how we can achieve those requirements that are listed within ISO 20000. The last piece here, there is a professional organization around IT service management and many of the service management frameworks, and specifically within ITIL, we have the ITSMF, the IT Service Management Forum. We have an overarching global organization, and many countries have their own chapters. So, for example, in the United States, we have ITSMF USA, there's ITSMF Germany, Canada, England, etc. They are multiple chapters around the globe that support the ongoing efforts and improvements, so continual improvement of the service management frameworks. Okay, so we've talked about the service management piece. We've said service life cycle a couple of different times. The diagram that's on the slide here is critical. You need to spend a little bit of time with it just to understand how ITIL is laid out. It's a hub and spoke diagram where ITIL is in the center. Again, ITIL is a set of books, so that's the core. And surrounding the set of books is that we have 5 life cycle phases. The first phase is service strategy. What's happening in service strategy is the definition of the governance, the policies, the standards, the objectives of that service provider. Now, those policies, objectives, governance statements should always go back and dovetail into the organizational mission, vision, goals, and objectives, because bottom line, IT supports that achievement. So service strategy gives us that kind of a direction. From service strategy, we go up into service design, where we take the requirements for a new or changed service and effectively and efficiently create a design to meet those requirements. The outcome of that service design is something called a service design package. When we get further into service design, we'll spend more time with it. But really, it's an electronic file cabinet with my designs, not only for the service, but for the architectures, the processes, the metrics, and how I'm going to manage that service. It's all bundled up nice and neatly, and we pass it over to service transition, where the build, test, and deployment activities occur under heavy risk mitigation. So service transition is exactly what it says. How do I transition the plans that we've got from the design and put them into that live environment within service operation? Again, service transition, heavy into risk mitigation. Once we've gone live in service operation, it's about keeping the lights on, maintaining the requirements that those services have been agreed to, performing routine maintenance, maybe doing small enhancements. But in service operation, this is where value becomes visible. The customer now sees the goodness or not of the IT organization and how they presented, designed, developed, and transitioned that new or changed service. So service operation is that first touch point to the customer. Then lastly, we have CSI. As we stated in earlier videos, nothing is out of scope within CSI, and you can see on the diagram it underpins all of the other life cycle phases. We're constantly looking for improvements into our process, our tool, our service, our interfaces from our suppliers and our business perspective, but also within our service provider and our IT relationships. So that's really the components of the service life cycle from a very high perspective. We're going to continue to revisit it, so we'll be providing additional information as we move forward. Okay, so there's a very important website here that I would like you to go check out. It's axelos.com/bestpracticesolutions/ITIL. It's listed for you on the slide, and I'll let you go and look that up as I'm talking. For the very purpose of this is that here is the core information around ITIL from a courseware perspective, from a certification perspective, but also from a very practical information. There's several links around general information, case studies, glossaries. This is one that I think that you should download. It's very important. You go ahead and underneath the ITIL tab, you'll see ITIL glossaries. Clicking on that, you'll get to ITIL and eventually be able to get the language that you need that glossary in. I wouldn't print it, but I'd certainly have it available. It's close to 100 pages, but it certainly does define the concepts that we're using. From a practical standpoint, when I go into an organization as a consultant, if they do not have a lexicon already predefined for how they're operating, I really like to say just use the glossary that we have in ITIL and say, here, we're just going to follow the definition of these terms as we deploy our adopt and adapt initiatives. Finally, within this website, you can also download the syllabus. The syllabus has already been provided to you, but if you wanted to look at other courses, you certainly could. There's sample exams for each of the courses, but I promise you, as you take these exams, or if you download them, it's the exact same exam that we've got already for you in this course environment. So the case studies are good information, and definitely that glossary is something to go and get. Okay, so here's another view of the service life cycle. I like this one quite a bit. Too often people incorrectly say that the service life cycle, even though we have the word cycle at the end, it's a linear relationship, strategy to design to transition to operation. And that's really incorrect. I wish I could draw this in 3D and put it into a file and be able to post it up here on a PowerPoint slide so that you can really see the interactions between these life cycle phases. So if you notice, we do have a linear relationship: strategy to design, so that we have an output of strategy becomes an input to design, an output of design becomes an input to transition, etc. But notice we have this other set of lines and links back to the previous life cycle phases. These are quite important because as I look at this, who's to say in the activities of service transition, in that build, test, and deployment, we don't come across a piece of information or gain a level of understanding that says, you know something, go back into service strategy and update our policies and principles, our strategies, and how we're going through this process because we've just found a better way. Another good thing around this diagram are the taglines. So each one of those life cycle phases has a tiny little blip associated with it to help you remember exactly what's happening in the strategy, design, transition, and operation and CSI phases. So I'll let you read those on your own. One more point on this is, again, continual service improvement. The CSI lifecycle phase is underpinning all of the activities. Nothing is out of scope for CSI. So not only are we looking at that service provider, we're also looking at the relationship to the supplier as well as to the customer, and quite frankly, into the customer's organization and their business objectives. All of that is impacted by IT, how we use IT, so therefore it is within scope of CSI. All right, and this last one, very heavy, very large, kind of a diagram. We have it broken up. This is a handout that you should be able to download off the course page, but this is a handout that I designed for my classes to help you not only study for the exam, but to give you some quick hints and tips about what's happening where in each of these life cycle phases. So notice, before I go into each phase, notice that every life cycle phase, as they surround the service knowledge management system, they're all interconnected, and these life cycle phases depend on the good data, information, and knowledge that the service provider collects and maintains. So I call this diagram the condo diagram because what's the important building in a condominium complex but the clubhouse, right? So that SKMS is the clubhouse because that's where I can pay my bills, work out, lounge around at the pool, whatever it might be. But that seems to be the center of a condominium complex. So we have 5 areas that we want to look at, plus the SKMS. So let's just go ahead, jump right into them briefly. Again, please download this diagram and keep it handy as we go through the rest of the course, because it will make a difference. Make sure that you see the relationships. So my last thing here, you need to know for the exam which processes are in which life cycle phase. So the mnemonic that folks have used in the past is 5, 8, 7, 5, 1. So there's 5 processes in strategy, 8 in design, 7 in transition, 5 in operation, and 1 in CSI. So remember, 5, 8, 7, 5, 1. It's kind of got a little ring to it, but you'll start picking up and pointing out which processes go in which life cycle phase. There's 26. You're going to have to remember all of them, okay? So let's go ahead and look at each one of these areas individually. We'll point out a few more things as we go. And so let's just jump right into it. Going to start with the clubhouse, so that SKMS here. Notice that the concepts and the items that are stored in the SKMS. We could have a business case, we have incident problem change records, known errors, the service design package, an organizational chart, there could be training materials, the service portfolio. This SKMS, or the Service Knowledge Management System, is really the library of information, data, information, and knowledge that's going to support that service provider. Is this a complete list? Absolutely not. But it is a start of understanding where things sit and how all of these life cycle phases and their associated processes require good information to make the correct decisions. We're going to spend a lot of time with the SKMS as we move forward. All right, so service strategy. Let's look at service strategy. Again, the tagline, governance and decision making. We have 5 processes The process abbreviation is following the process name. So we have strategy management, service portfolio management, financial management, demand management, and business relationship management. So don't forget those acronyms at the end. Several key concepts that are happening in strategy. Remember, this is around developing the policies and the standards, allowing us to make decisions to support the organization. So we have the concepts of value and resources and capabilities, the portfolio, its subcomponents of the catalog, of retired services, of the pipeline. All of these different key concepts are going to be discussed within the service strategy. These key concepts that are listed are requirements of the exam, so we will come to them. Service design. It's around building structural service integrity. This is about taking the requirements and creating a design. Remember, there's 8 processes. So we have design coordination, service catalog management, service level management, availability, capacity, continuity, information security management, and supplier management. One more time, the acronym for that process is behind its name. One of the key elements in service design is the 5 aspects of service design. It's listed for you here, and it is something that you are going to have to know. We will discuss it later on, but this is a good study diagram here. So these are things that you need to know. Other key concepts that come up within design, the RACI model, the 4 Ps of service design, sourcing structures, concepts around SLAs, OLAs, and of course the all-important service design package. The next one here is service transition, where this is where we prepare for change. This is the build, test, and deployment of the service design. 7 processes, so transition planning and support, change management, service asset and configuration, release and deployment, service validation and testing, change evaluation, and knowledge management. One more time, those process acronyms are behind each process name. Just a few key concepts in service transition. Concept of what is a configuration item. The 7 R's of change help you analyze and assess a change. The service V model, which is something that will come up as we move on into the intermediate side, but it is a way of designing and testing, making sure that the requirements are built. It is not a testable item in the foundation class. The SKMS, which we've already seen, and the concept around data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Finally, we have the service operation side. So this main side, we're deploying the newer change service into operation. This is really where we have a concept of business as usual. So we have 5 processes here: event, incident, request fulfillment, problem, and access. Acronyms behind the names. We also have a concept of the functions that are within the service operational phase. So we have 4 functions: the service desk, technical management, application management, and IT ops. IT operation management is divided into 2 sub-functions: IT ops control and facilities. Functions define a specific set of activities that will support processes or support other activities. These functions have their own unique work methods and how they do things. So we'll spend some time on those functions. Some of the key concepts here: the known error database out of problem management, communication philosophies, I guess we should say, and how do we deliver to the best needs of the business. So service operation. All right, so finally here is the CSI Lifecycle phase. Again, another tagline for you: efficiency, effectiveness, optimizing costs of the economies. There's only one process, the 7-step improvement process. Its acronym, again, behind the process name. And then there's a bunch of key concepts here around what's happening in CSI. So we talk about measures and metrics, CSF's KPIs, various improvement models. How do we go about reporting, the CSI manager? So those are all key concepts that come up in the foundation course that we find out and learn about in the CSI module. Okay, so that's the highlights around the service life cycle, and we will discover or dive deeper into each of those as we go through the various modules. We'll see you in the next module.